In the Ethics of Evil, the Stories of H Division, how would you describe the book you've written?
Look, it's a bit tricky because it's a bit of a jigsaw. I did it so that there was a record for anyone down the track if they wanted to really know the truth about our history in that part of our history, that they would have a document that documented everything I could possibly think of about H Division. So I was able to get hold of the transcripts from the Jenkinson inquiry, every book or every article that had ever been written on H Division, the personal stories of the prisoners who went through there, plus my own sort of anecdotal stories of having been in prison that was relevant to H Division. So it's a bit of a potpourri of a documentation, at the same time written in a way that arguably will incite you to want to read it, because it's not written as it is written as non-fiction, but it's personalised non-fiction. So I include a lot of my anecdotal stories. So for example, I include the letters when I was in H Division that my mother wrote me, which I thought were just beautiful.
In your book you have an extensive number of stories and examples of what happened. I'm just wondering if you could share a few of those stories with us about some people.
Well, what I did was I made it my task that I was going to write about H Division at some stage or other. When I got out, I wrote a play about it, but I never wrote the book that I've just written. But before I got out of prison, I asked all the people who I personally knew who were in H Division when I was down there and prior to me being down there, would they write for me their stories? And if they did, one day I'd publish them for them. Exactly what happened to them in their own writing has been recorded. So people like Stan Taylor, who when he got out of H Division and was released, finished up being responsible for blowing up H Division. Chris Flannery, who we all know as, he was the person who I wrote A Green Light Around, who ultimately became known as Mr. Rent-A-Kill. He was unbelievably treated badly. Archie Butley, who years later blew his way out of the assessment centre in the city. Julian Knight, who we all know has been responsible for Hoddle Street. He when he heard that I was writing the book, contacted me and asked me if I wanted to include what happened to him on his induction into H Division. So some of the stories are the most compelling stories you'll ever read, in the actual words of the people who suffered the brutality that they suffered.
When you think about everything in the book, are there particular stories that you feel most passionate about that you'd like to tell us?
Chris Flannery's was the one that I felt most passionate about. I knew Chris, we were very, very close, Chris and I. Chris ultimately was best man at my wedding. That's how close we were, and that was years later. And he was only a kid when he went to H Division, 18 years old. And he was totally brutalised. They broke him. And he was so broken that when he started to mature a couple of years later, it had affected him so much that he wanted to avenge what they had done to him. Avenge, not revenge, but avenge. And had himself sent back down to H Division so he could take the place on. And that's exactly what he did. It was quite incredible. And his story is there as he lived it and as he wrote it. To me, that was one of the most courageous things I've ever seen any person do, ever.
Can you tell me a bit about how it was for you being in prison? How did it feel? How did you manage?
I was lucky in that because I spent 7.5 years in Pentridge, and then years later, I did 9 months up in Long Bay, but I managed by saturating myself in study and becoming involved in the drama group and athletics, and every activity I could do, I took advantage of. So my attitude was that I'm going to be here for a long time, 7.5 years. I want to make it. I want to use every day. But to me, I didn't want to waste those years. I knew I deserved to be there. I'd made the mistake of being there. It was my own fault. And as a result of being there, I wanted to take advantage of it and try and turn my life around. And I use it pretty effectively. Embellishing, but it's the truth. I was the first person in Australia in a prison to start a degree and finish a degree within prison, and I was quite proud of that.
Absolutely. Can you tell us a bit about the theatre group with the prisoners and the plays?
when I got out, when I was released in 1975, I formed an ex-prisoners theatre company because I was lucky enough through my playwriting in Pentridge to get a bit of a reputation, and I was invited to participate in the first ever intake of the Victorian College of the Arts drama group. So I went and did 3 years there as a theatre director. And while I was there, I established an ex-prisoners theatre company called Governor's Pleasure. And the first play we put on was a play called Every Night, which was about Hates Division and Chris Flannery's role in Hates Division. And that was the first play we ever did.
Such a shock. Some of the brutality and what we didn't understand was going on. How did this come about?
Look, it came about because some prisoners had escaped from Pentridge, and they'd escaped in a violent way, that warders were injured when they escaped. So therefore, what they wanted to do, they wanted to establish a situation where any person who ever thought of escaping from a country prison or who played up within prison against warders would be sent to this place where they knew they were going to be punished in the extreme. So the idea was to set up this ideology of absolute fear and terror so that prisoners would behave themselves, and it worked really effectively. That's the irony of Hates Division. It was very, very effective. It turned out potential monsters who were really responsible for some atrocious crimes, and there was never any link between the two. The people who went through Hates Division, they often returned to prison for crimes far more violent than the ones they originally went in for. And to me it was so obvious. It was like sending a kid to boys' homes. You knew that 60 to 70% of those kids were going to go into prison. Well, if you sent someone into Hates Division, brutalised them the way you did, and the brutality was extreme every day. It was real fair dinkum brutality, not just a sort of slap here and there. It was fair dinkum thuggery. You were going to turn out kids who, boy, if they had the chance to, if they had the chance to turn the tables, they were definitely going to do it. But part of the solution also is that the people who know about what happens, writing about it. So what happens in our society is that the people who write about crime aren't necessarily the people who know about crime. They're the people who have become experts on literary crime. But the people who, I've always believed, the people who should be writing books are judges and lawyers and crime czars. But it's like trying to heal health patients through getting them to write about their experiences. It's not only an intelligent way to encourage people to heal themselves, but the world becomes more knowledgeable because they understand what people are going through. So writing about it is a really important part of the problem too. It can only be purchased as an ebook, unfortunately.
I reckon it's great because there's so much in it. It's so substantial. You really learn about what went on because there is such good evidence-based material in it. And the other thing is I believe the writing from the heart, as you do, and everyone being so clear about what was going on is fantastic because it's very confronting and it really does have a big impact on people. So I highly recommend the book. It's fantastic.
Well, thanks, Meredith. I really value your opinion.